come out to the street to express social discontent and different forms of rebellion against neoliberalism. So in our paper, we are interested in focus on what happened in those processes of rebellion against neoliberalism in South America. And to do this, maybe I think it's important to give some context of what is happening here in the last few years, because we have in South America what have been calling like a right-wing turn in the politics, in the governments, in the president. So this right wing, for example, in 2018 in Brazil was Jair Bolsonaro was elected as president. In Chile, during the same year, Sebastián Piñera was elected. And in Colombia, it's the same. I can give you more examples, but I think with those three, you can get this idea of that right wing that we are experiencing now in South America, and the rhetoric of this politics during their campaign and during the government is a nationalist wave of government populism. And in the case of Bolsonaro, I'm very sorry that my colleague from Brazil is not here, but it's more extreme. I mean, it's a new way of fascism that they are living in Brazil. I'm gonna go in deeper on that later in the presentation. And in the case of Chile and Colombia, with Piñera and Iván Duque, we have a businessman on power. Yeah? They are millionaires that have do all their career in corporation, and they govern the countries now, and they administrate our country as it was a kind of corporation. So we think that we are experiencing here in South America an authoritarian neoliberalism. Yeah, I don't want to go deep in neoliberalism, the concept of neoliberalism, because I think you are very familiar with that. But this authoritarian neoliberalism and the privatization of our social life have high life costs, and we have a return to high level of poverty that during the last decade was down with other kind of government, more center-left government that work a lot in these social issues, but the poverty now is going up and the inequality is worse than ever. Also, in this authoritarian neoliberalism, we have a explicit exclusion and marginalization of social groups, for example, immigrants, young people, sexual diversity, amongst others. But in the meantime, this authoritarian neoliberalism configures in South America, it has been a lot of resistance and from activists and social movement. I'm gonna go in deeper on that. But this resistance and this activists and those social movements have been as answer a huge, a brutal repression from the governments and the politics. And in our case, as researcher and activists, we have get involved in the street, in those activists, in those social movements, and this movement that taking place in our countries, trying to understand how these local struggles in our cities, in our country, or also in some synchronity with other movements that emerge around the world. So in the paper, we want to describe this from Brazil, this experience we have from Brazil and from Chile, because we have been part of this process. So, well, I'm gonna tell you very some about Brazil.
Yeah.
Guilherme was the idea was have to present this, but I gonna try. I don't know if you're familiar, but since 2016 there was a legislative juridical coup against Dilma Rousseff, and since then the escalade of authoritarian have raised, and there's a persecution of social movements and from activists and militants that they have been accused of putting national security under threat. During Bolsonaro's government, as I said before, the privatization of state company, the life cost, and the return and poverty and hunger have been notorious and extreme. Also, the normalization of what they call militias, there's group of policemen that are in the favelas or in the poor neighbors, with the argument that they are fighting against drugs or occupying those territory to normalization. And it has been a lot of increase of murder from black and young poor people by state forces and these militias. In the case of Chile, we had a social revolt during October 2019, and it was started with the young student, that process of social mobilization that was followed by other social group, other students, university students, and finally we have thousands of people in the street demanding a fairer life and the end of the neoliberalism as a form of government. And it's a quote that they was writing in the square, the Plaza Dignidad Square, the Dignity Square that now is calling, that the quote was, neoliberalism is born and dies in Chile. I was very familiar, but this, I think, represent the main spirit of this movement. And this protest and manifestation was in different cities and Chile, and we believe this social revolt. But at the same time, the repression was terrible. The discourse of criminalization, the social protests from the media, from the government, was very, very intense. And in the practice, thousands of people were detained, and now we still now in May 2021 is more than 700. We have people as prisoners of the revolt. They are still prisoners for being there in the manifestation, and more than 350 people have 8 traumas because military and the police shot these young people right in the eyes. So, and more than 30 persons have died. So the repression has been brutal in Brazil, in Chile. Now, I don't know if you have seen the news from Colombia. It's the same. It's happening same. More than 40 persons have died during the last month. But after those social movements, what are we living now? We are living this lockdown social control situation. Yeah, since the 2020, we are staying home because we have strictly forbidden to go out to the street. So with this COVID argument from our health, but the social movement or not in the street. I put a photo from Santiago. I don't know if you see in the first photo is from the lockdown in the center of Santiago, and the other photo is from the revolt we have in October. See how thousands of people is on the street protesting, and now with the lockdown, we have these empty streets, and people are at home, and we think this is creating a scenery that defines that Mark Fisher have called apocalyptic view of capitalist realism. And but this is happening not just in Chile, also in South America with this social control for the COVID, for the pandemic. And as I was telling you, during the last month in May, it has been a very similar revolt in Colombia. More than 40 persons have died. Is this kind of revolt in different cities more similar that very similar that this experience in Chile? Here we are living elections of a constitutional process that have been declared and have a lot with this movement that I was telling you about, and we are living this process of election. And in Brazil, Guilherme was telling me, sent me photos from the manifestation they have this weekend, for example, 2 days ago, in the most important cities of Brazil. And there's a quote from the.
You have 2 minutes. Sorry for interrupting.
Thank you. I'm almost finished. When the government is more dangerous than the virus, it's necessary to go to the streets. And how do we see the future? I think this is what we are thinking, and we want to discuss in the paper, and we also want some feedback of that, of what we are thinking about. But the neoliberalism is more and more authoritarian in the South America, and I think in other parts of the world also, and it have allowed some advances, new form of fascism. I think Brazil is a good example to represent this. And those governments have a huge disapproval, these authoritarian neoliberal governments. Because also the administration of the pandemic, we have 1,000 of people that are dying. Brazil is one of the worst case with they call Bolsonaro genocide, because he doesn't administrate so well. But in other countries, we have also a lot of thousands of people dying of it. And social movements are starting to go back to the street. So it's a stronger resistance, and it's have developed more form of alternative organization during the lockdown, cyber activists and other ways. And we think that we are going to live more transformation than a continuity. There's going to be social change, but there's also a lot of repression for this transformation. As I tell you, what is happening in Colombia, in Chile, in Brazil also. Lula, the ex-president, was in jail, now is free, and is an actor that can go to election against Bolsonaro and maybe have some hope to go back to a more center-left government. But anyway, we finally want to discuss and learn from each other's struggles. This what's, as I say in the beginning, those social movements are around the world, Hong Kong and Europe, here in South America. And it will be very interesting to do some reflection on how the social movement activists can in some way engage in a broader movement of movements, and that's our idea. So with this, I'm finished my presentation. Thank you for your time, and open to discuss about it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Guillermo, for sharing your talk with us. So now we have a couple of minutes, I would say up to 5, for discussion. Yeah, who would like to go first? I see that there are no comments in the chat yet, so you're most welcome to write them down there, or you can just raise your hand and I will ask you to voice your question. So, Ariana, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks so much. It was an amazing paper and presentation and so much food for thought. I think I have many questions, but one would be, you were talking about how you feel that there is a time of transformation coming. And you were also mentioning about movements going back to the streets and the picture, the contrast between lockdown, social control and what was before was very striking. So I was wondering, in this moment of transformation, how do you see forms of organizing happening? Do you see the radical potential of going back to the street, or will it be a mixture of a cyber form of organizing and connection? Yeah, and also kind of connected to that, you were talking about learning from each other's struggle, and I was wondering, how do you see that learning, that also cross-border learning to happen? Is it again online by connecting activists from different countries in South America and beyond, or is it more about also managing to connect physically? Thanks.
Thank you, Ariana. Yeah, I think there's going to be this alternative wave of organization have a lot to do with cyber activism. For example, during the lockdown, I didn't mention, but the last photo I have is from Instagram, and it's a protest of some person, and this hashtag Bolsonaro genocida, Piñera out from Latin America, this kind of governments have a huge impact, specifically during the lockdown. But when the movement was articulated, I think this happened in every part of the world. They have a huge potential of call participants, meetings in the street. So the internet and the use of the media is very important, but also the alternative ways of form also have to do with the forms of protest, how people protest, because there is a first line of protester that or go direct to the police and the militaries that are there and how they argument. We are living a economical crisis because the pandemic, well, in every part of the world, but a lot of young people have lost the work, the jobs, and they don't have anything to lose. So it's a more different situation. I have talked with a lot of these young people, and they only want to go back to the streets and fight against the power, the military, the police represent, but also to go in the street. In the specific case of Chile, we are living those elections for a change of constitution. We are still have the constitution of Pinochet. So it has been a very important process we have now. And I think this also have some dialogue and some regulation of the violence in the streets. Here, I'm talking just about Chile. I can't say that the same in Brazil or in Colombia as we took as example. And I think it's going to be more creative form of protest in this new spirit of constitution change and new opportunity to construct to build up a new country. And I think it's a lot of hope of that, also from the young people. And about the struggle, I think it's important to be connected. We are here in more academical and activist conference, and I think it's important to know what happened in different parts of the world, and that's also our idea to present on what has happened in South America, some reflection. We have some ideas that we are working on the paper on it. So thank you, Ariana.
Many thanks to you both. So I would like to close this part here. So so Ariana is with us, but I'm not sure if Ian is with us. So in case he does not manage to join, then actually we can do this kind of Ariana's presentation followed by some questions to you, and then we can open for a more general conversation to kind of look at the complementarities of your work. So Ariana, great. That's great to have you here, and your paper is titled "The Primacy of Social Reproduction Struggles: Abolitionist Reworldings for Post-Pandemic Times." You will have 15 minutes to present, and 2-3 minutes before I will let you know that it's time to wrap up. And yeah, now you can just go ahead and share your screen if you have slides to share. The digital space is yours.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I'll try to share. Yes. Yeah, can you see my presentation?
We can.
Okay, cool.
We can. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try. Yeah, I'm very sorry. I've been having bad connection, so maybe it's a bit slow. I'm trying to. Should start now. Okay.
We can see your presentation.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool.
Yes. So, and it's in the presentation mode. So all looks good from our side.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so I'll start. I cannot really press anything, but hopefully it will get better. Okay, so I will start. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yes, I'll start. Okay, so yeah, so under capitalism, social reproduction. So it's more theoretical than previous presentations, but towards the end it's get less theoretical. So yes, apologies for that. Okay, so under capitalism, social reproduction, the reproduction of our lives, is subordinate to the reproduction of our lives as workers, our body minds as endowed with a capacity to work. The satisfaction of our needs to survive, depends upon our ability to perform wage work. Under capitalism, the exigencies of accumulation and processes of valorization determine the organization of social reproduction as the reproduction of labor power rather than life. And the pandemic has created a space for new configurations of the relationship between production and social reproduction. My paper will suggest that these reconfigurations amount to a disruption of the primacy assigned to production over social reproduction under capitalism at the symbolic and structural levels, and yeah, and my viewpoint really very much connects to the activist space in Scotland. So yeah, so Europe and the global north. So my paper will explore the reward links made possible by this disruption, suggesting that they must necessarily be abolitionist, namely nourishing life relations out of the abolition of the principles which sustain the main relations through which capitalism sustains itself and destroys life. Wage work as an expression of the capital-labor relation and as organizing our existence alongside the productivist horizon, which determines the value of our lives and their disposability. Second, the border, together with the nation, form of sovereignty and solidarity that reproduces the border at the levels of governance and community respectively. So the pandemic mainstreamed the centrality of the principle of life over that of profit, and of the crisis of the reproduction of life over the crisis of the capitalist models of production. Globally, mutual aid projects proliferated, and for most part of the pandemic, the provision of social welfare became more generous. For example, in the UK, conditionality was suspended. So, okay. Sorry, my presentation is bit
Yeah, we still see your main slide, so we will let you know once this changes.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Maybe. Okay.
Yes.
Now, yes,
Okay, cool.
it's moving.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so focusing on the social mobilization, focusing on the social mobilization that flourished around issues of social reproduction, Anna Cecilia Dinerstein suggests that it created concrete utopias that enhanced the capacity to negate, affirm, contest, and reshape the relationship between individuals, society, and the rule of money, value, and the capitalist state in the here and now. So these concrete utopias of social reproduction materialize the priority of life over capitalist accumulation, and in this way overturn the primacy assigned to production over social reproduction in many spaces. This primacy and its consequences for life and gendered subjects of social reproduction have been examined from different angles by Marxist feminists and social reproduction theorists. So Marta Jimenez poses the primacy of production as what determines social reproduction. For Jimenez, under capitalism, we cannot talk about social reproduction intended as the social relations and institutions surrounding the reproduction of the population and the social groups, classes, strata within classes, and any other divisions characterizing the population in a given society. Instead, we should talk in terms of capitalist social reproduction, which makes the survival of the working class contingent upon the health of the capitalist economy. She says, under capitalist conditions, reproduction takes place under historical specific conditions in which production determines reproduction. So before the pandemic, the possibility to assert the primacy of social reproduction and the political power of social reproduction struggles were imagined by Marxist feminists and social reproduction theorists in limited form, or associated with a world-changing potentiality placed beyond the horizons of the possible. For example, Susan Ferguson, a social reproduction theorist, sees struggles around social reproduction as chipping away at patriarchal and other forms of oppressive relations. But for Jimenez, more structural changes can only happen after the transition from capitalism to socialism, and are tied to the supersession of capitalist social reproduction by socialist social reproduction, where the satisfaction of the material needs and self-development of the direct producers would determine the objectives of production. So this is still quite productivist, but so under socialism, reproduction would become foundational in practice rather than theory. If before the pandemic, social reproduction and Marxist feminist theorists deemed social reproduction struggles as constrained by capitalist horizons of productivity, during the pandemic, not only did social reproduction become thinkable as the telos of social relations and organizing, so did social reproduction organizing itself. This happened most notably in the form of burgeoning initiatives of mutual aid. Crucially, mutual aid departs from capitalist social reproduction in all its defining aspects. Its end is to reproduce people as people, not as workers. It is performed collectively outside the private space of the household, and it does not aspire to be valued as labor or reproductive labor, but positions itself antithetical to the sphere of production. It also indexes the interconnection between the primacy of social reproduction and world transformation. As Dean Spade notes, mutual aid initiatives address the condition that shorten people's lives while also providing, as they say, a transformative alternative to the demobilizing frameworks for understanding social change and expressing dissent that dominate the popular imagination. This transformative alternative is what is needed to avoid the imagination of the capitalist nation state as the caretaker of our social reproduction, which the pandemic popularized in the global north through the dispersal of governmental authority and presence across society as the guarantor of responsible behavior. In place of support for a lockdown strategy related to a conception of health that has more to do with security rather than public health, Panayotis Sotiris says, social reproduction struggles of the order mutual aid, I would say, allow us to prefigure, Sotiris says, socialism and communism as the collective invention of new associative and collaborative social forms, from the workplace to social reproduction. For this reason, as Federer and Silvia Federici contends, the response to this pandemic cannot be a vaccine. It has to be a drastic change in the main conditions of our reproduction. Reproduction as a broad set of activities and structures and their capitalist forms need to be turned upside down if we want to live in a world where our life is guaranteed. For Federici, the pandemic offers the possibility to revalue social reproduction as the basis for a rewarding of the deadly word of capitalism. She explains, when I speak of revaluing reproduction, I mean to place the focus on reproduction. I mean that to place the focus on reproduction is to embrace a different logic from that which moves the capitalist system. It means to revalue our lives and refuse to subordinate them to the accumulation of capitalist wealth. We need to make this moment a moment of change. There is no normality to go back to. So asserting the primacy of social reproduction means to organize, to collectivize or render permanent the social reproduction of our communities as the focus of our struggles against and beyond the productivist framework that positions workplace struggles as defining the horizons and strategies of class struggle. In post-pandemic times, or in the mature stages of the pandemic we are currently inhabiting, the challenge is to determine the horizon of possibility around social reproduction issues that the pandemic has bequeathed to us. This, for me, is defined first by a redistribution of the sensible Rancière sense of the complex of narratives and voices that render phenomena differentially thinkable as far as the forms of social reproduction are concerned. Second, by the potentiality of new forms of social reproduction to become present without being so yet, in the space opened up by the collapse of the pre-pandemic social order in which production enjoyed primacy over social reproduction. And third, by the lapsing of the productivist telos of social reproduction and of bordered conceptions of solidarity. So I have already discussed how the pandemic has witnessed the formation of struggles for a social reproduction disconnected from any productivist imperative. As for the debordering of social reproduction, the pandemic has made clear the necessity to disconnect social reproduction from any form of bordered nation solidarity and sovereignist management. The global character of the pandemic has made it impossible to ignore the planetary reverberation of the health, economic, and social crisis it involves, but also of the forms of struggles the crisis has witnessed from, for example, the fight against police violence in South America, Black Lives Matter, Kill the Bill in the UK, or the generalized neoliberal destruction of our healthcare systems. So in response to and attempting to crush these planetary reverberations, there have emerged discourses and processes of nation in the crisis and our responses to it. First, the management of the pandemic at the national level has reinforced the nation state, as many people have examined. Secondly, pandemic solidarity has been nationally bounded through a bordering of discourses around social solidarity that early imply the disposability or culpability of national others, thinking of migrant issues, for example, people still crossing borders. And this nation pandemic solidarity is a manifestation of a much wider operation of the sense of belonging within the shared community of the nation as the wellspring of social solidarity. So with this in mind, how can we create the conditions for a non-productivist and debordered primacy of social reproduction in post-pandemic times and still pandemic times? So ultimately, this comes down to asserting the primacy of the reproduction of our social reproduction movements, not ourselves as individuals, labor power, or national community. As Federici notes, we need to build a movement that puts on its agenda its own reproduction. The anti-capitalist struggle has to create forms of support and has to have the ability to collectively build forms of reproduction. Key to creating the conditions for a non-productivist primacy of social reproduction is, of course, to connect welfare rights movements across national territories and internationally to fight for truly universal and debordered welfare provision, but also, and most importantly, to anticipate oppressive policy change and develop strategies to make oppressive policies unworkable. Strong welfare rights movements.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, cool. Strong welfare rights movements that fight for the conditions of people's social reproduction can challenge discourses that present the boosting of processes of valorization and accumulation as determinants of socioeconomic well-being of our physical and social reproduction. Key to creating the conditions for a debordered primacy of social reproduction is to pose the caging of social solidarity within national borders, alongside the common sense notion that solidarity and rejecting the common sense notion that solidarity is ultimately sustained by an ethic of social membership, a sense of belonging to a shared community that historically is tied to ideas of nationhood. So movements have shown how this can be done by first placing the question of universalism as far as welfare solidarity and coverage is concerned in a broader than national citizenship context. Second, can be done by actively connecting migrants, housing, and welfare struggles as social reproduction struggles that foster solidarity between migrant and non-migrant locals based on shared needs, and we have many examples of that. And finally, can be done by tracing the horizon of social reproduction struggles through grassroots mutual aid initiatives and spaces. And here, I'm just sharing an appeal by the Autonomous Centre of Edinburgh, with which I'm involved. That basically we are going to lose our space, and so we are trying to find an alternative place to be. And of course, our funds are very low, also because of the pandemic, we weren't able to conduct several activities through which we would raise something. So I'm sharing this appeal just with some, just if you can donate, it would be appreciated. And I think this very much connects to the idea of self-reproducing movements and the need to make to be able to reproduce our movements. And I think many of us really struggle with that. And I think this conference is amazing because of the different ways in which movements have been reproducing themselves, and both today and tomorrow. There are so many papers that discuss that. Okay, so to conclude, I would say that these forms of reproducing ourselves collectively, so putting the social reproduction of our movements first, for me helps us realize a form of debordered social reproduction as revolutionary anti-capitalist politics that cannot accept state and national borders because, to quote the Marxist collective liaison, it already prefigures revolutionary existence without subject, project, or heritage, including that of the people. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks. So I'm trying to exit my presentation. Maybe it's a bit slow.
Thanks a lot, Ariana, for bringing to our attention the very important theoretical frame of social reproduction and how it connects so much to the world around us in the view also of the pandemic and post-pandemic times. So now I would like to open the discussion. So now I would like the participants to ask questions to Ariana. And again, we will take about 5 minutes for questions directly to Ariana. And then we see if Ian joins us, or we open to the broader discussion between Ariana and Guillermo. So who would like to start? You can just raise your hand and I will see you. Or you can also write down your question in the chat. So I don't immediately see raised hands or questions in the chat. But I think that maybe Guillermo, would you like to step in and to ask or comment on Ariana's talk? You are muted. Now, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I think our presentation in a dialogue, I more show an empirical thing and not so much theoretical approach. But we also have it, but I didn't focus on it for this presentation. And I see a very interesting theoretical presentation. And my question or my interest, I don't know if it's really a question, but how do you connect this with the empirical, with the a more local maybe experiences in where you're living, or how do you connect it from these theoretical approaches and with the social movements?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, and yeah, I think so I chose to go in that theoretical direction, try and make sense of maybe of how certain ideas that were always mainstream in the movements that I'm familiar with, from welfare rights struggles, housing struggles, mutual aid initiatives, and migrant solidarity, and at the Autonomous Centre of Edinburgh we have all these groups. We have groups involved in all these struggles. I was trying to work out how maybe, so we always, of course, like many social movements, it's easy in social movements to put social reproduction first. For the first part, it became more mainstream. So I was trying to work out what possibilities for expanding our movements are there. And thinking, for example, of welfare rights struggles, welfare rights groups have in the UK at least, don't have a very limited number of activists, and lots of people participating and then going back and forth, and many of us are disabled. So there is always the specter of a crisis of being able to reproduce our movements, even if but with the pandemic there was hope, that because, like yourself, you were mentioning people who have lost their jobs, and so that opened up different ways of exploring activism and becoming involved. I think for us and welfare rights struggles, there was the hope that more people would join just because of the huge number of people who for the first time were experiencing harassment, the harassment of the welfare on the benefit system that was very generous during the pandemic, but now conditionality is coming back. So for us, the point was, okay, so now more people are on benefits. We need to try and connect with these people, so as to really build a counter power as far as welfare rights struggles are concerned. Unfortunately, that did not really happen, which opens up lots of, self-criticism and reflections around how do we reproduce these social reproduction movements, because the number of people is not enough to sustain these movements. And so I think the question throughout the pandemic was, how do we build on this mainstreaming of awareness that social reproduction, that life is more important than profit, just to quote like slogans that you can find in any newspaper, life over profit. How do we exploit that to make our movements more sustainable? And I think we are. I think there have been. So I think that was the question, and in terms of this the welfare rights movement, we are trying to now to create more meetings, more public meetings. But during the pandemic, it was very difficult because we were just trying to connect with each other and to map the situation. That was more difficult to map because there weren't physical job centers open, so it was more difficult to map. So I think this, so I think, I'm not saying it was a missed opportunity, but I think, this context of the pandemics where life is more important than profit in some progressive slogans, how do we translate that into something that really enables the social reproduction of our movements by getting more people involved? And I think, so that, and also about the other struggles that we have at the Autonomous Center. Other groups instead were able to really expand their activities, like the Migrant Officina Precaria, which is a migrant solidarity mutual aid, migrant solidarity group, who did a lot of mutual aid and was able to get more funding for mutual aid projects. And also Edinburgh Mutual Aid were doing a lot. So so I suppose I think there is an expanded space for expanding our movements, but I suppose it's differentially so, and very much depends on the structures of our groups and our movements as well. And I suppose now, as conditionality and sanctions and harassment comes back in the benefit system, many of us know there will be more evictions. So I suppose, there again, the horizons of possibilities for connecting social reproduction struggles are going to change again. So it was a bit, maybe not very tight, but.
Thank you both for this exchange. So now it is 2:20, and I would like to turn to Yusra to check if Ian is definitely not in the session.
Yes, definitely not in the session, but I also tried to reach out by email and gotten an automatic message of not being out of office, so to say. So maybe this is the case. Yeah, that he will probably not join.
Yeah. So then I suggest that for the next 20 minutes we continue this dialogue that you have very nicely started together. And I would like to invite the participants here to join in. So again, feel free to use the chat or the raise hand function. And maybe while I'm letting people to, okay, Yusra, you have the first. So
oh, you go if you.
you go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to thank you both for your presentation. Although I had to leave and do some stuff, I wasn't there all the time. But from the conversation that you have just started around how the pandemic both obviously offers opportunities and challenges to rethink or think about the sustainability, the maintenance, the survival, and the growth of our movement, or not growth may not be the best word to use. I wanted to ask a question about really how the pandemic has impacted your practice as activist scholars, in a sense. Because both of you seem to have a close involvement with these movements, working on these topics. So yeah, how does the pandemic shifted or transformed, maybe, or constrained or enabled your role or your participation within these movements? Guillermo and Ariana, I don't know, maybe Guillermo can start.
Thank you for your question. I think in the more academic way, it's having more writing. You know, it's very unfortunate to say it in this way, but you have more time. You're at home. You are not with people. So for me, I have been writing and working on papers. We did, for example, a very interesting ethnography during this October revolt in Santiago and in Valparaíso, main cities of Chile. So I was working with colleagues, and we did a paper about it. I mostly read in Spanish. I'm sorry, but this is in Spanish and come out in a journal from Colombia. It's about youth, about how young people see this revolution, this revolt, this Chilean revolt, and our interesting was to ask them why they come out to the street in this moment and not before or in another. So we were working on that, and we also took as ethnography fieldwork a lot of photos, and we did analysis of this photo and how some squares was the part of meetings, and also, for example, a critique against corporations that was with graffiti against neoliberalism, and it was a wave of manifestation and protest for the young people. So in a part having this and more connected online, doing the last, for a year ago, we did webinars and talks about social movement, connected academia with some social movements, and it has been difficult. And I have been talking with people, and there's people want to go out to the street again, to see in the street, to manifest, to be in the street. And I think here in Chile, we are waiting for that. It's like a second revolt that maybe is coming. I hope it's not with so much violence, because that's the hard and terrible part of it. But people want to get out. I go out because this. I was telling you, the young people. I work with youth, so they don't have anything to lose to go out to the street. They're in this situation that you don't have anything to lose, so they want to go out, and a lot of precarity of work that also I'm interested in investigate how the pandemics also reconfigures the work of the young people. So I'm on this line, and also I'm part of the critical academical organizational study in Chile, and we also do webinars and things to promote this discussion between. Maybe it's more academical, but we are inclusive. I mean, with social movements, it's not so easy. I mean, to connect academia with social movement, but we try to do it. I hope I answer your question.
No, definitely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Maybe Ariana, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it was great to hear what Guillermo was saying, and it's a really great question. So for me, yeah, so basically I had a teaching job that was renewed every semester for many years, and I lost that with COVID. So so I became an independent researcher, and in a way, that was. And even before I was on benefit, because what I earned was not enough. So I was already a precarious worker, and I lost my academic job. And I think I loved teaching. This said, it was liberatory to. I think the pandemic for me created a space where lots of reading groups, discussion groups, meeting people, academics, and researchers from the other, the other side of the globe was normal. And I think I'm a member of like 12 reading groups. So that's amazing for me. And compared to before, when I was teaching as a precarious tutor, and that was mad. So for me, yeah, in academic sense, I want to go back into academia, but should I do that, I will certainly try and do my best to preserve these spaces of connection, and also thinking of how so many of us are supposed. So if we go back to the pre-pandemic, how many precarious staff are employed in higher education. So I suppose if we want to make our conferences accessible, some kind of online blended for must stay, because travel costs, registration fees were a barrier before the pandemic for me, and now in the pandemic, in a way, has taken those barriers away. So I suppose it's a challenge for academia itself to hold onto these decommodified spaces for learning and knowledge exchange beyond and against institutional affiliations, as well as processes of valorization from universities wanting to have people attending conferences, staying at their expensive hotels, and that stuff, which is really depressing, and it's and there are barriers, and I suppose when this pandemic will recede and we will see which conferences will go back to that very much capitalistic model from before, and whether we will still have these reading groups online where we come together just to do research together. And I think the same applies to activism. Before, whenever we wanted to connect with activists from other cities, other countries, we had to find the money to bring them over. Even train tickets, like in Scotland, we have this network called Action Against Austerity, which started in 2014. And every time we had to raise money for, to enable activists to meet up, welfare rights activists, so none of us has money, because we are all on benefit in some form or the other, we are all disabled in some form or the other. So we needed to find this money for the train. And we couldn't, and if we wanted to have someone from some movement from another country, we had to look for funding to bring them over. And without that physicality, there was no dialogue, because that was the precondition for exchanging strategies and experiences. So the pandemic has scrapped that. So I suppose, so I've been having lots of activist meetings every week, so many meetings. Before we had monthly meetings, now they are weekly or twice a month. So I suppose because it's you don't need to pay for travel, and we are also organizing an international welfare rights meeting with people from Canada, Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, and Europe, and other places, Australia. We are trying. So this was impossible before. So I suppose, yeah. So I suppose again, it's something that can help a lot, attending to these planetary reverberations of our struggles in terms of activism and learning as academics, and I suppose also so we are just now that in Scotland things are opening up a bit. We are really trying to think closely what we want, how we want our plan public meetings to happen, where we want to just because we need to keep spaces accessible, and the online this online way of connecting is important, especially I suppose for those of us who don't have the money to travel so much or to bring people over.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I see some questions in the chat, and I would like to bring up Claudia's question. So Claudia writes, I'm curious to know if there has been mutual aid movements in South America as much as there has been in the UK, for example. So Guillermo, that is a question to you. And also I would like to perhaps complement it and ask if in the movements in South America that you are engaged in, if the issues of social reproduction are acknowledged or are at the forefront in one way or another. So, and also when you're addressing this question, you can briefly address the kind of issues of censorship by government in universities and scholarly and activist work. So this is kind of the final big question to you, and then we will have a final big question to Ariana.
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm reading them and here. Yes, mutual aid movement. I don't understand what maybe. Can you help me with that? What is mutual aid movement?
Yes, Ariana, would you like to quickly address this, because this is what you're so directly involved in?
Yeah, I suppose during the pandemic, they were about looking out for, so there were grassroots movements organized within communities, so which would involve like bringing food to people who had to isolate, or looking out for people, or bringing comfort to each other. So it was a plethora, and I suppose in a wider sense, it's about, for example, in terms of welfare rights struggles, one claimant helping the other, so on an equal, as equals, not as someone providing a service to someone who has who occupies the opposition of receiving that help, but something that is totally horizontal and mutual. Maybe someone else can explain.
Okay, I understand. Yes, Claudia, we have a lot of initiative of that, particular in the more precarious sectors of the population. For example, I live in Valparaíso, and Valparaíso, the poverty have grown out, the precarity. I mean, a lot of people have been without employment because it's a tourist city, and a lot of young people work on restaurants, hostels, and that kind of things, and don't have employment. So there's a lot of I don't know how to say in English, but when you cook for a food um, organization that preparing food in the communities and gave the people the food. I don't know the name in English of that, but there's have been a lot of people help those organizations with food, with money in some place. The local government cooperate with food, so they can make the food and give to people, and it's free food for a lot of people. For example, my brother worked a lot on that in a particular territory of Valparaiso, and they are very well organized, young people. They cook for themselves and also for others, but the main is for others, but they are doing as an alternative way of organization that we haven't seen that experience in the dictators here in Chile. During the dictator in the 70s, it was kind of common that this food organization, and we haven't seen that in decades. And now with the pandemic, with the poverty, is have come out. So yes, that for example, one of initiative, and they are also in different cities of Chile. There's another question from Fernanda.
Yeah, about
Yes,
censorship.
Sorry, I censorship. What's that?
Censura.
So
Okay. Gracias.
Por nada.
Yeah, in Brazil, Guilherme was telling me that with this authoritarian, the university have a lot of problem, the academical, because Bolsonaro have promoted this idea that if you are teaching things that can be more critical or more left in a left thinking, you are not promoting the well-being for education and for the society. So a lot of colleagues from Brazil was very, very worried about it, and they are living this kind of censorship, auto-censorship, as they self do it to don't get involved in problem. And I was also, some colleagues tell that some students are recording with the classes, and that's a very strange thing. In Chile, it's not in that level, but it's something strange because everything is recorded now. It's like a big panopticon we have in the academica. So now, for example, this is recording, and when you're teaching, it's recording. So it's a little bit complex because, for example, in the university, we don't know who is seeing those students. Of course, they have to see it, but we don't know who else more see it, and that can be a kind of a control of the knowledge and what you're teaching. And yeah, but we don't have this so much. And with activists, with the leaders of activist group, it has been principal from socio-ambiental group have been some kind of persecution in different countries in South America, and that's a very terrible situation. And I don't know if there's no more question for me, no?
thank you for addressing this. Yes, and people are also saying thanks. So now I think we should really close the session within the next 5 minutes or so. So I would like to ask Ariana a final question based on the discussion we have been having. So for you, social reproduction theory is an important framing to kind of make sense of activism, social struggle, and the fight for change. So do you think this can be also a frame that can help to unite the different movements that you have been mentioning? So housing, migration, welfare rights, and others.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really great question. Yeah, and I think I totally think so. I think thinking of I think we've always maybe tried to connect welfare rights and housing struggles, but also mutual aid and migrant solidarity struggles. They are very much connected, and I suppose there is always, I think, thinking of these different struggles as social reproduction struggles just provides a framework where we also add that point about that we are moving away from a productivist framework, which is what defines the welfare state. As always, define the welfare state as a national community of workers falling upon hard times, and so at that point they get something out of the state because in theory they have paid something in, and so disabled people but also migrants are encounter the problem with this, and I suppose our movements are allow us to think social reproduction as organized from below, which does away with these barriers that destroy life, and I'm excited about in what comes next after the pandemic, because I suppose that will determine that will create possibilities for connecting our struggles for not going back. And I suppose that will require concerted efforts by our groups, and it's a lot of work, just not being sucked into our single issue difficulties, which, like I was saying, are very big for groups like the one I'm part of. So trying to think beyond that and connecting to others under this social reproduction umbrella, and attending to the strategies we need, which are, I think, I know can be bad to say, I know it's not good to say, but they are different from those in a workplace. You can't do workers' inquiry in the job center. You need different strategies. So there is a different level of mapping that I think in housing, welfare, migrant solidarity, there are more similarities, and I think there is a lot of potential in thinking of all these different struggles and issues as social reproduction struggles and issues in terms of the priorities this involves.
Great. Thanks a lot for this rich exchange that we will take with us also into the rest of the conference and beyond. When thinking of your work, I also couldn't help connecting it to the book of Stefania Barca called Forces of Reproduction, where she actually uses this kind of social reproduction theory or kind of different feminist work as a frame, but she is inspired primarily by the South American and in particular Brazilian context when she talks about environmental justice struggles and kind of frames social reproduction as care of people and also for and with the environments. And I think that's also there are many kind of links to what you have been discussing. So I would like to ask everyone to give you a round of virtual applause. So thank you so much. Yes, the links to the next sessions will or have already been posted by Yusra. So see you in a bit, and many thanks for this particular session.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye for now. See you in a bit.
See you, Katja, in a bit. About 10-15 minutes in the other rooms.